Gosh.
Okay, we're on.
We're on. Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may be. Welcome to another lockdown lecture with Harif. And a particularly warm welcome to all those joining us from across the pond. Harif, for those who don't know us, is the UK Association of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. We've been running a very active Zoom program since the beginning of the pandemic, and we aim to raise awareness of the history and culture of these Jews. We are recording this and it'll be on the Harif website, which is www.harif.org. I do urge you to subscribe to our mailing list. If you are not already there, all you have to do is visit the website, harif.org, and it's free to subscribe. Check out our sister website, Point of No Return, which is a blog updated daily, and it keeps you in touch with the latest news. If you have any questions or comments for our speaker, I do urge you to write them in the chat. There's a button at the bottom of your screen. I think I've finished all the sort of housekeeping points here. Just to say that Harif is run by volunteers. There are 5 of us, and we do our best to educate and also sometimes entertain. So tonight, we are talking about Syrian Jews in the US. Those of you who've been following our Zoom lectures may remember we had a Zoom about Sephardi Jews in Yorkshire, in the north of England, and also one about Sephardi Jews in Manchester. And of course, most of these were Syrian or Turkish Jews who came to England towards the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. But of course, the largest community to settle in the West was the American, the Syrian Jews who decided to resettle in America. And I'm delighted to welcome tonight the foremost expert on Syrian Jews in America to talk about how they ended up in Brooklyn, because apparently about 50,000 of them live in quite a small area of the borough of Brooklyn. So welcome, Sarina Roffé. Sarina is joining us from New York. She's a respected expert on genealogy and Sephardic history, and the author of Branching Out from Sefarad, which provides an overview of Sephardic Jewish life from the Spanish Inquisition onwards. Is that right, Sarina? Yes. Sarina has written quite a few books and articles. She has also written cookery books. She's done an awful lot of genealogical studies, including a vast tome, which she was showing me, which is the, yes, let's have a look, which is the history of her own family, enormous book there. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Sarina, for Syrian Jews in Brooklyn. How did they get there?
Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to join you tonight. Of course, it's afternoon here in New York. I'm going to share my screen so that you see my presentation. Let's see, and I think I have to go to from beginning. Okay, so you guys see that? Is everybody,
Yep.
Are we seeing it okay?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to take you on a little joyride that'll take you through about 100 years of history and explain to you kind of what I know and explain to you a little bit about my own family so that you could get a little color into this idea. So I'll tell you what you probably already know, that after the 1492 expulsion from Spain, Jews dispersed really around the world. About half went to Portugal, a lot went to North Africa, and the rest went around the Mediterranean basin, North Africa, and the countries of the Ottoman Empire. Now, what we know now is Syria actually didn't become part of the Ottoman Empire till 1516. And some people actually did go to Italy first. We have lots of evidence of Sephardic Jews in Livorno. But they start arriving in Aleppo and Damascus, and the Ottoman Empire obviously really welcomed them. Now, what we know now is Syria and Aleppo and Damascus had an indigenous Jewish population that went back already thousands of years. And this is where Sephardic Jews settled, and we saw a huge increase in their economy and their trade. So living in any Muslim country, you lived as dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And what that meant was, in the Quran, there is a special place for Jews and Christians. Okay, they call them people of the book, and they're a protected people. So to live in the Ottoman Empire or in any Muslim country, you had this status, this dhimmi status, which basically meant that you were protected. You could live autonomously. You had military protection. You did not have to serve in the military, but you had to pay a poll tax, which was based on every male head of household. So it was based on the number of able-bodied males in the community. Now, dhimmi did not mean equality, because if you went to court, then and you had a dispute, a Jew had a dispute with someone who was Muslim, the Muslim court, which is based on Sharia law, had to accept the word of the Muslim over the Jew. So it didn't matter what it was, the Muslim was always going to win out. So people learned to live, I want to say, below the radar, not to draw attention to themselves. And when you hear people who came out of Muslim countries in this period, late 19th and early 20th century, they'll say, oh, we lived peacefully, we never had any problems. But part of the reason they say that is because they learned to live under the radar. You know, in times of bad economy, you might have had some friction. But if you learn to not draw attention to yourself, then you stayed under the radar. You didn't have any problems living with your Muslim neighbors. So primary trade in Syria was in cotton and silk along the caravan route, and economic hardship began when the Suez Canal opened up in 1869, as well as the Industrial Revolution. Girls had no education, except a few that went to Alliance schools, and boys had a kitab education, which basically meant that they went to the synagogue and they learned prayer Hebrew, a little bit of math, because you needed that for business. The French Alliance schools opened up in the late 19th century to integrate religious and secular studies and increase education for Jews in Arab countries, and both boys and girls could attend. Now, you have to understand that Aleppo was a center of Jewish and Torah learning for many, many centuries, and there are many distinguished rabbis. There's a lot of respect for rabbis. And I know you want to know how we got to Brooklyn, but this leads up to it, I promise. So in the 18th century, you had the Francos, the Spanish, the Italian, and the Dutch, who were of converso stock, moved to Syria, but they maintained their European citizenship, which meant they weren't dhimmi, okay? They had European protection. So it benefited the local community because it provided jobs and economic opportunity, and it opened markets to Europeans, but there was some friction between the Francos and the local community because they didn't want to observe some of the rules set up by the local rabbis. So why did they emigrate? Well, the main reason is that the economic decline after the opening of the Suez Canal and the death of the caravan routes that flowed through Damascus and Aleppo. In 1908, the Ottoman Empire is taken over by the Young Turks, and this ends dhimmi status. And what that means is that they're starting to conscript Jews into the military service. This was the biggest impetus. There was impetus a little before this because of economy, but military conscription was the death knell. My grandfather, my mother's father, was taken off the streets of Aleppo for 25 years of service. Now, he managed to escape and he managed to get to America. But the fact is that this was happening to boys over and over again, teenage boys. And parents didn't know what happened to them. They just took them. So you first start seeing, now what you have also is that there are shipping companies that are advertising in Jewish newspapers for people to come to New York. And they're advertising rates and they're advertising, to buy the tickets to come to America. America is land of the dream of your dreams. The streets are paved with gold, and they have all these ads. The Alliance schools are French. A lot of the ads are in French because people know French. People knew French in Aleppo and Damascus. There's a lot of French influence in Beirut. All in that region, there's heavy French influence. And my grandmother came, she knew French just as well as she knew Arabic, which was her first language. So you have men coming over because they're seeing these ads. The military conscription is an impetus for people to get literally thrown on boats to get out of there. And these are kids who are coming at 13, 14 years old. They're coming, they're young, they're not old. They're young teenagers that basically get on a ship by themselves, start to work. They work as peddlers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, what their life was like. And as one comes, they start meeting the boats. And when they meet the boats, they see people from their community and they say, okay, this is where our people live, okay? The Hebrew Immigration Aid Society does the initial placements, but they're placing everyone with Ashkenazic families. And the food's different. The Ashkenazic families say, you don't know Yiddish? How could you be Jewish? If you don't know Yiddish, what Jew doesn't know Yiddish? And these people didn't know Yiddish, they knew Arabic. And not only that, their Hebrew had an Arabic accent. So they were like completely out of, and they were not eating, stuffed cabbage, okay? So lots of things developed because of this clash of culture, of the way that people lived. And also understand, they weren't coming from ghettos in Syria. They had houses, they had, they weren't confined to neighborhoods. So immigration continues. It stopped a little by World War I, but in total, our estimates based on the census provided by Kamal Karpal, we estimate there was about 5,000 people who came during that period. So this economic decline in the late 19th and early 20th century spurred immigration. First, it's Egypt. There's Israel. There's a move to Israel. A lot of rabbis are moving in like the 1890s. They go to Israel, and of course we know to Manchester, which established a community. There was a bankruptcy. That should be 1869. Sorry. There was a bankruptcy by the Ottoman Empire. The Suez Canal opens in 1869. And of course, as I mentioned, the Young Turks take over. So where else did they go? So we know about Egypt, right? We know about Manchester. We know they also went out, if they couldn't get into New York, they went to Buenos Aires next because it was straight down. Mexico City doesn't open its doors really until after World War I. And so some end up in Mexico City. But what happens is now you have families where siblings are separated. And so in the early 20th century, when you couldn't get into the United States, you might go to Buenos Aires or you might go to Mexico City. And from there, other communities pop up literally all over Latin America. We know of communities in Sao Paulo, in Bogota, Barranquilla, Caracas, Panama City, and of course in Israel. So I wanted to get back to New York, and this is a picture of my grandparents on their wedding day. This is Frida and Joseph Misri, and you could see that they are quite young. We estimate that she is about 14 in this photo, and he is about 18 or 19. So I'll tell you an interesting story that comes from this photo. During our entire lives, me and all of my cousins were told that she came as a bride, a promised bride, and that when she got to America, that the person who sent for her or who was supposed to marry her said, "I sent for a bride, they sent me a child." And he gave her money to go back. And in those days, no one went back. And that my grandfather was in the room and he said, "Well, if nobody else will marry you, I will." And that's how they got married. Very romantic. When I did my family tree and updated it last year, I mean, I've worked on my family tree for years, but new things come. I finally found both of their ship records, and it told a very different story. So this is her ship record, and this is a close-up of it. And it says here, if you can see my pointer, Frida, F-R-I-D-A, Shma. Now, we all knew her maiden name to be Sha'alo. And you have to understand that in Syria, when you have people had double surnames. So the double surname was Sha'alo Shama. Now, I know Shama here in the United States is spelled S-H-A-M-A. And the only way I found this was that in her index to naturalization, there was a number. And I was able to trace that number to her actual application for citizenship, for naturalization. And it used this spelling, S-C-H-M-A. I never would have found this. And I went to one of my father's cousins and I said, "Where did this come from, Shema?" And she said, "Sarina, it's a transliteration of Shama, Shama, Shema." I was like, okay, never would have found this. So she came with her brother, right? So this guy is Ezra, it's her brother. And this is the other side of the page. And he's going to his brother-in-law. They're going to move in with their brother-in-law, Ezra Levy. So Ezra Levy turns out to be the husband of their sister. They had an older sister who apparently had already come here. And what's even more interesting is this is June 1907, okay? So she comes June 1907. Here's his ship record, and he comes as Yusuf Masry, M-A-S-R-Y, not M-I-S-S-R-Y, and he comes June 28th, you can't see this, but it's 1908. So he's coming a whole year later, so he wasn't in the room. And they don't get married until June 1909. So interesting story. We dispelled the story with true facts. Now, she's got all these Jews living on the Lower East Side, and you've got all these Syrian Jews. But guess what? The Jews from Damascus didn't know the Jews from Aleppo, because in Syria that's 150 miles apart, before they had cars. They didn't have a train. They had to go by horse and buggy. And so they really didn't know each other. And so what happens is they come to the Lower East Side and they're living side by side. And suddenly they have to get to know each other. But if you're an Aleppan Jew, you don't let your daughter marry a Shami, a Damascus Jew. That's intermarriage. Okay. They do set up the Road for Zedek Burial Society, because that's the first thing that any Jewish community does, is they have to have a place to bury their dead. And when you get off the boat, the first thing you're doing is you're a peddler. And there were people, they would go and they would get pieces of a tablecloth or napkins or whatever, and they would take it on consignment and they would go door to door selling. And then you moved up if you had your own push cart. But it was a while before they actually had retail establishments. In about 1910, a few people start moving to Williamsburg. And the reason that but they move a lot. And I learned that the landlords would give 1 month free rent. So people moved to get the 1 month free rent. Okay. There's a guy named Isaac Shalom who becomes a very prominent philanthropist in the Syrian community, and he gave credit. So a lot of people, and he sold napkins. That was his things, handkerchiefs and napkins. And because those were more popular than tablecloths and runners. And so when people would take it, he gave them credit. And sometimes he would say, okay, when they paid him back, he'd say, okay, you have to give 10% to charity. And he always made them give to charity because that was his way of building up the community, so that you had this beneficiary. He wanted them to learn to give to charity. So when people opened retail stores, including my own father, I'll tell you, they sold textiles, they sold linens, they sold tablecloths, they sold runners. There's some import-export in the early 20th century. Mostly it's children's clothing from the Philippines. My father-in-law was heavily involved. He's from Morocco, but he worked for a Syrian company in the Philippines, manufacturing children's clothing. There's also a big tendency to hire relatives and other people from the community. It was this, we take care of our own attitude. So I told you they moved. These are the addresses of my grandparents. And you could see they kept moving every year or two. They just, like they had 1 million addresses in Williamsburg, and I probably didn't even find all the addresses. And then what happens is that the community moves to Bensonhurst because the Sea Beach line, which is a subway line, takes them from the Lower East Side to Bensonhurst. And that opens up the world of opportunity for people to be in Brooklyn. And that's really how they ended up in Brooklyn. What happens is that this is a photo from a parade at the opening of the Magen David congregation. Okay. Also, the children attended a public school, which was the first time they did that. And community members taught children Hebrew. So they go, I must have duplicate slides, but retailers are seeking a way to earn a living. So they actually move from city to city, and they go all over the United States, call it the Westward Movement. They go to Atlanta, they go to San Francisco, to LA, DC, Chicago. I have relatives that were in Richmond and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They moved to Bensonhurst, and then when they moved to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, they established 2 synagogues, one for the Aleppans, which is Magen David, and one for the Damascus Jews, or Shamis, which they call Ahiezer. So this is Ahiezer, and this is the synagogue as it was in Bensonhurst. No longer exists, but that was the synagogue. And this was the Magen David, which was the Aleppan synagogue. And it's today on the National Register of Historic Landmarks. And it's the inside. I took that picture myself. So in 1933, this guy named Rabbi Kassan, actually it's 1932, he comes on a fundraising mission from Israel to raise money for orphans. And he's of Aleppan descent, but he's born in Israel. His parents died when he was very young, when he was a teenager during World War II, and there was a famine in Israel. His older brother goes to Mexico City. His younger brother, Shlomo, stays in Israel. He's a Talmudist. He's very gifted. He's very well respected. And he comes to New York in order to fundraise. And he's very successful. Very successful. They have Mag and David opened. Rabbi Towel is here. So there are rabbis here, but they wanted a chief rabbi. And they offer him the position of chief rabbi. And he says, well, I have this family in Israel. I don't think so. And they make him sign a document that says that if he accepts any position outside Israel, it will be in New York. He signs it because he doesn't think he's coming. Then he goes to Mexico City. He does fundraising. They offer him a position as chief rabbi. He says, I'm sorry, but I already signed this document for New York. Besides, I'm not leaving Israel. Then he goes to Buenos Aires, also fundraising. Same thing happens. This guy's popular, right? Anyway, he goes back to Israel. He tells his wife, she says, we're never leaving Israel. And his father-in-law says, I don't know about that. And her father says, you're going. It's a good opportunity. There's a lot of Syrian Jews there. You could be of major influence. So in 1933, this is the photo of him, his wife, and two of his children as they're coming to the United States. And you could see from the dress, look how young she is. And you could also see from his hat, that's the typical head covering you would have seen in the Middle East in those days. And the dress that he's wearing is typical dress for a male rabbi in the Middle East. So he becomes chief rabbi, he organizes the community, he forms this rabbinical council, and what he sees is that people are working on the Sabbath. Economy's bad. 1933, it's right after the Great Depression. People have to work. They have to earn a living. They have to feed their families. They're moving every year so they can get that free month's rent, anything to save $1. And he sees also that the community has been influenced by Americanism. Remember, during this time, there aren't a whole lot of kosher restaurants. Not like today, where you could walk down the street and have a kosher bagel, kosher pizza, kosher Italian, kosher Chinese, kosher Mexican, kosher Korean, kosher Japanese. That doesn't exist during this time period. And so in 1934, 15 people in the community, it's estimated, married non-Jews or converts. That was a big blow. This was something that did not happen. You have to understand that the social mores of living in Syria, you didn't cross that line. Yeah, the Muslims might live on one side of the street and you might live on the other side of the street. You might do business with them, but they weren't part of your social circle. So in 1935, he issues an edict that we call the Takana, and it's against marriage to converts. And basically, it's a complete rejection of anyone who converts to Judaism. And in the Takana, it says, no male or female member of our community has the right to intermarry with non-Jews. This law covers conversions. It points to a 1927 edict that was issued in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, by Rabbi David Sutton, which says to build and establish an iron wall to protect our identity and religious integrity, to bolster the strong foundations of our faith and religious purity, which we have maintained for many centuries, going back to our country of origin, Syria. This is the original writing in his handwriting, and it's signed by 3 rabbis. Now, the Takana also forbids community rabbis from performing conversions. It warns that if community members ignore the edict, that others will be advised not to marry their children. So there's a big social implication to this. And it really becomes the cornerstone of the community and effectively stops or significantly decreases the rate of intermarriage, they say, to less than 2%. I believe many people just moved away. But it does, within the community itself, this is very well known. It has to be read every year out loud on the Shabbat between Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. And this edict is also hung with a loose English translation in the lobby of every synagogue. So they're serious. This is a photo of my mother's mother, Esther Salem. And you might recall back here, I realize I forgot to mention this. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to this one photo. This photo is a photo of my grandmother's sister, Rose. She opened a restaurant on the Lower East Side, which catered to the Syrian Jews, especially those men who came by themselves. So this is her kind of outfit. And people liked to go there because she spoke Arabic and they felt at home, and she cooked the foods of the community. So now we come to her sister, who's my grandmother. And my grandmother opened with her husband catering kitchen. And the kitchen was located in the garage, which was in the backyard of their house, which is why my cookbooks start with the name Backyard Kitchen. She and her husband cater bar mitzvahs, sabbats, brit milahs, engagement parties, when people die, shivas. In those days, and we're talking World War II and after, people had everything in their home. There were no social halls yet. No synagogues had a social hall. Ahiezer doesn't open its first social hall till the 1970s. So everybody, if you got married at the synagogue, and then you went home for your party. So those things had to be catered. And many people in the community remember my grandmother and walking to that backyard kitchen to buy, in addition to catering, she also just sold her food. And sometimes I make a recipe and they'll say, oh, this tastes just like your grandmother's. During World War II, we had a lot of people serving in the Army, the Navy, and this is a publication called the Victory Bulletin, and it told of news from home and news from the front. They also serve in the Korean War, less so in Vietnam, but some people enlisted in the National Guard. This is a picture of my father and his older brother, Sam, who were both in World War II. This is another cousin. These are other cousins who served during World War II in our family. So remember, I talked about the effects of assimilation and being religiously segregated in Syria from your Muslim and Christian neighbors. Well, in Brooklyn, those barriers are gone, and the effects of assimilation and acculturation touched the community. So when men came home from World War II, some of them came home with non-Jewish wives. And again, so now you have the Takana is reaffirmed. It's reaffirmed in 1945, again in 1972, with consequences. Consequences like your children can't go to our yeshivas. You can't be buried in the cemetery. You can't get an aliyah in the synagogue. We will not sell you a seat in the synagogue. It's reaffirmed again in 2006 because, stupid me, I wrote my master's thesis on the Takana, and I found a comma that changed the meaning of a sentence to mean they would accept. Originally, the way it's written, they would accept a convert if they were not for the purpose of marriage. If the person was a legitimate convert and converted Orthodox, the Takana had to do with conversion for the purpose of marriage. And they believed that if you were converting and getting married to someone, how could that be sincere? But if you converted not related to marriage, then it could be a true and sincere conversion. I found a comma that was inserted later, which changed the meaning, and it said, basically, we don't accept any conversions. It doesn't matter what it's for. And that really changed the meaning of it. And when I brought this to the attention of some rabbis, they decided to reissue it. So, guilty. The community that lives together, plays together, they vacation together. Community members spent their time in Bradley Beach. Later, they moved, I would say by the late 60s and 70s, they start moving to the Deal, New Jersey area, where they really set up a community with yeshivas and synagogues, lots of synagogues. They start moving in the 1950s to the Ocean Parkway area of Brooklyn, which is dubbed Aleppo in Flatbush by author Joseph A.D. Sutton, who actually does his master's thesis when he's in his 70s. And this is a guy who had no high school education. So this is the example of the houses, which are much larger in the Ocean Parkway area than they were in Bensonhurst. There are many summer resorts that people go to. People, as an economy issue, family ventures, they were looking for stores any place that they could go. And they would go to stores up and down the East Coast during the summer season, the beach season, when people flooded to these beach resorts. So stores would opened by Syrian Jews. They operated 7 days a week. They were family ventures, and they were all up and down the East Coast. This is an example of some of the cities. And this store, Harvey's, was my parents' store. My parents had a store in Rhode Island, Watch Hill, Rhode Island, for 45 years. My father got out of the Army in June 1945, and his brother, his uncle, was in Cranston and said, there's a store in Watch Hill, maybe Abe wants to go to it. There was a sign that said Harvey's. My father couldn't afford to change the sign, and he became Harvey for the next 45 years. So this was an example of the type of store. And all of my cousins, all of my father's siblings had stores in these summer resorts. And it was like a big thing. People did this. Let's talk a little bit about education. Magen David Yeshiva opens up in about 1946, although the years are a little blurry because Isaac Shalom he decided he wanted a yeshiva, and he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. It opens in the same building as the Talmud Torah. He starts taking over classrooms. The community opens up a community center. He takes rooms in the community center. The community center board tells him, no, you can't do that. There's a community center. He takes over another class, and they said, no, we told you no. And he says, oh, I heard yes. And he just pushes and pushes and pushes. And he basically takes over that building. And by the early 60s, virtually all new school-age children are attending yeshiva. Today, we have about 12 different yeshivas. There's probably more, but at least 12 today. Over the years, we've absorbed Sephardic Jews from many different countries: Lebanon, Egypt, Morocco, Iran, Iraq, Israel, and many other immigrants. over the years. So the Syrian Jewish community is really not Syrian anymore. It's more of a mix. As they moved to those larger homes on Ocean Parkway, more synagogues opened, and eventually Bensonhurst is behind us. There's affluence in post-World War II. There's an investment in summer homes in New Jersey. And by 1970, Deal, New Jersey actually becomes a satellite community of Brooklyn. The infrastructure develops, and it's really all privately funded. So you have not only the building of yeshivas and synagogues, this is a community center. You have mikvot, you have senior citizen housing. There are many, many institutions. This is what they call the Mother Synagogue, Sharet Zion. It opened in 1960. It's a beautiful dome synagogue, and the seating inside, it was expanded in 1990. The seating inside in the social hall is for 1,000, and they pray literally in every nook and cranny of this building. There are different congregations within the building now. So if you follow different rabbis, depending on when you want to pray, it's in operation about 20 hours a day. You can literally find a minyan here almost at any time. And you will find in most congregations in the community, there are multiple minyans simultaneously and then consecutively. So you might have in the morning 15 or 20 in the same building. Office buildings in Manhattan will have mincha services in the office buildings. They actually have a website where they post all of the different mincha services. And then at night are beef services in the community itself. This is Achiezer, the more modern Achiezer that opened in about 1980. This is Congregation Beth Torah. So I want to talk about, we had talked a little bit before about education and yeshiva education, going from public school to yeshiva education. But what we have is a little problem with the yeshivas and who's going to teach there. The community itself did not value higher education. Remember, they're coming from Syria, they had limited formal education, and they don't really understand the need for formal education for women. Women are just going to get married and have kids. Why do they need an education? Boys are going to go into their father's businesses. All they need to know is math, accounts receivable, accounts payable. But the Ashkenazic community, they're into that higher education. So when they open the yeshivas, New York State requires licensed teachers, and there's no professional class in the community. So they need a professional class. So who are they hiring in their yeshivas? They're hiring the Orthodox from. So those are the people who are teaching in the yeshiva, and this results in compromising those Judeo-Arabic culture that they were raised in. And what happens is those Ashkenazic teachers promote higher education. And before you know it, men are attending college. And before you know it, women are attending college. And before you know it, you have this development of a professional class. So today we have everybody goes to college, just about, except I want to say the more Haredi in the community, but most people will go to college today. And we have a wonderful professional class. These are some of the social institutions we have. We have a B'Kor Holim, which is like a premier mental health institution. We have our burial society. We have Gamaz and Mikvot. We have career services. We have our version of a small business administration. We have a food fund. We have Search, which locates medical professionals. We have a drug education and prevention program, and we have senior citizen housing programs, which are run actually by Achiezer. This is an example of the senior citizen housing. We currently have senior citizen housing for about 200 senior citizens. This is the Bikor Holim building. I'm getting to the end, I promise. This is the community center. And then in 1972, we know about what happens to a lot of the Syrian Jews who are being persecuted. I'm sure you've had a presentation already with Judy Feld-Carr and the escapes that are beginning. This is really another lecture, but the final wave of immigration comes in 1992 when political pressure from our community to Syria forces Assad to open his doors. And for a short window, 5,000 Jews are airlifted out of Syria, courtesy of Edmund Safra, who pays for their plane tickets. About $5 million for those plane tickets. So occupations today, they're professionals, they're in wholesale, some are in importing, some have large chain retail stores. There's a decline of those summer resort ventures. Our community is viewed as prosperous because we have some of us have large homes or 2 families, but we have a Bikor Holim. We have the same bell curve as any other community. We have poor, we have middle class. It's just that the uber wealthy are the ones that seem to get the attention. This is a map showing the dispersion post 1942 really around the world. And the reason that I'm showing you that is because all of these people who ended up in Brazil, in Venezuela, in Panama, or Costa Rica, or Mexico, the global ties that separated people 100 years ago are allowing people to come together with technology. And we've been able, and I've been able to connect families that were separated 100 years ago, 3 and 4 generations later, with the families that they have in other countries. And I think that's a wonderful thing as we find out more and more about our family histories. So these businesses have international ties, and they're very business savvy. It doesn't matter which country they're in. I'm finding that all the way. Also, I'll tell you that the community supports synagogues all over the world. You'll find Sephardic synagogues. Men, if they're away for long periods of time due to travel for business, sometimes they might bring their family, but you need kosher food. So a restaurant opens. So Kehilat Zion of Kowloon is an example. They have a synagogue. They have a place for you to sleep. They have kosher food. So people who are traveling, they're with strangers in a foreign country, they have a place to go that's comforting to them. There's support for Zionism, for Israel, and some institutions in Israel actually cater to the Brooklyn community because most people will have their bar mitzvahs there now. They'll send their young people post high school for 1 year of study, and they support philanthropic institutions in Israel. As I said, technology allows us to come together 100 years later. Demographics, Lynn said before 50,000, we really don't know. Some people say 80,000, we're not sure. We think about 30,000 are in Mexico, but there are Syrian communities all over Latin America, and they all have ties to New York. These are some places where you can look for Sephardic genealogy. I will tell you that Sephardic Gen databases have been given to IGRA, but also to Jewish Gen. And so you'll start to see this website, Sephardic Gen, fade away soon as Jeff Nalka retires. And these are my books, Proceeds Benefit Sephardic Heritage Project. And this is how you can get in touch with me. And I thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sarina. That was absolutely fascinating.
I hope I didn't go over my time.
No, it's fine. So I feel we've been transported to Brooklyn via technology, which, as you say, is bringing us all together. It certainly is in our case. Can I just start off with a question? How do you explain why Syrian Jews are so observant? After all, they had the Alliance Israélite, they had the Francos, who presumably knew more about Catholicism than they did about Judaism at the beginning. How do you explain this phenomenon?
I think that it really is the effect of the yeshivas, because what happened was when the yeshivas started, all of these grandparents and parents who had kind of gone astray, like my own father, he would go eat pork in a Chinese restaurant that wasn't kosher. Would never take us there, but we ate in restaurants that weren't kosher, and I didn't even know until one day I was sitting in school with a Syrian was sitting behind me. We were in public school, and I was telling her, "Oh, we used to eat in this restaurant," and she'd say, "Is it kosher?" And I was like, I didn't know. And I went home and I asked my mother, and my mother was like embarrassed. She was like, "Oh my God." And so what happens is when you have the kids go to yeshiva, they come home and they started questioning their parents. And so now suddenly the parents have to be in line with what's being taught in the yeshivas. And then the parents are like, "Ma, I can't go to your house because you don't do X, Y, or Z." So now her parents have to kind of toe the line with the kashrut. And more you see, and then it's Shabbat. And then so I think that yeshiva education, which by I want to say the mid 1960s, when when you have all the civil unrest in the United States and you have desegregation of schools, everybody starts putting their kids in yeshivas. And I really believe that caused the community to be more religious. And you have rabbis who now speak English instead of just Hebrew. And when you could speak English to an English-speaking population, because now everybody knows English, you can't just bring your rabbis from Israel. You have to have a rabbi who's a good orator. Mm-hmm. And you have rabbis who really are towing the line. And then you have this social enforcement of the Takana, which really has serious meaning for a lot of families. So I think the yeshivas were number one. I think the orators in English-speaking rabbis, there's a lot of respect for rabbis, a lot, really have an intense effect on the community. Now, I'm not saying people don't leave. People leave. My older sister married an Ashkenazic Jew in 1971 when, oh my God, you might have seen stars burst from the sky. But today, it's pretty widely accepted to accept an Ashkenazi Jew as a mate for your child because you want them to at least be Jewish. That's like the minimum requirement. Rabbi Kassan married over 2,000 couples in his 6 decades in the community, and he checked the Judaism of every single one. When my husband and I went to get married, we met with Rabbi Kassan a few weeks before the wedding. He opened up his logbook and he said, "This is where I married your parents, and this is where I married your parents." And he had it in his logbook. So it's carefully documented.
Joe Dweck asks a related question. How does the community view the Takana today? And do you think it will still exist in 10 years' time?
Absolutely. It's not going anywhere. That Takana will exist. That Takana will stand. That Takana is not going. People really believe in it. Mm-hmm. They really do. And people try and get around it, but it doesn't work. There's too much social stigma around it.
Mm-hmm. But wasn't there a scandal involving a rabbi who married out? Is that? Am I?
There's always scandals.
There's always a scandal. Okay.
Scandals.
Yeah, you mentioned sebet as an occasion.
You would call it a kiddush.
A kiddush.
A kiddush after service.
Sebet, because it's on Shabbat. A kiddush on Shabbat is a sebet. Yeah, and I think there was another word I didn't recognize. Gamma. A gamma.
Gamach. Yeah. So a gamach is a free lending service. Right. So you find them in many religious communities, but basically what it is, it's like, let's say your daughter is going to be a flower girl in a wedding and you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars for a dress she's going to wear for 2 hours.
Mhm.
So they have a gamak where they'll lend the dress and you just pay the cleaning fee. Or they have gamaks with tables and chairs, or they have a gamak for wedding dresses for girls, or there's so many different ones, tools, clothes for a Brit Milah for the baby, for a Brit Milah. You know, he's wearing it what, for an hour, you know? So those kinds of things, they're called, baby furniture. So like car seats, swings, things like that, that are, you know, baby oriented. You have a baby. I'm a grandmother. Do I want to spend for a car seat when I'm going to have the kid in my car? You know, my grandchild in my car. So I borrow it from the gamak, and then I can give it back. Some of them, they just give it to you. Some of them you have to pay like a cleaning fee or something like that. Tablecloths. At a party in my house, I borrowed tablecloths from the gamak because I wanted them all to match, you know. So that's what a gamak is. It's basically a free lending service.
Right, very interesting. Some of our listeners have got questions about genealogy, their families, and I would suggest that you contact Sarina and ask about your various families.
And I'll put my email in the. I'll put my email in here so that people can.
Danny Wolfson, I think, is from Manchester and thinks he might be related to you because he's got Shamas in his family. But perhaps you can carry on the conversation after we've finished our Zoom. I'm not sure there are any other. There are questions about. Did the Iraqi community interact? This is from Rivka. Did the Iraqi community interact business-wise or socially with the Syrian community?
So it's very interesting. The Persians set up in Great Neck and they set up in Los Angeles.
Right.
We do have some in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But they kind of keep to themselves. In Great Neck, there's a huge community in Great Neck. Rabbi Yosef Patone is like the big rabbi there, and he's actually born in Buenos Aires, but he's got a big following with them, and I would say that they kind of keep to themselves, but we do have several in Brooklyn. They don't have their own synagogue. We have, for example, we have 2 Lebanese synagogues, we have some Moroccan synagogues, we have the Shami synagogues, we have the Halabi synagogue, like each of the we have Egyptian, a couple of Egyptian synagogues, like each ethnic group seems to separate itself, although they do mix within the synagogues, but they kind of identify, you know, like Ahava ve'Ahava is known to be the Egyptian synagogue, you know.
Right.
Like
and what are the differences between the Shami, the Damascus community and the Aleppo community? Are there still differences?
So back when, 100 years ago, the difference was that the Damascus community was more European. They were more heavily influenced by European values, whereas the Aleppan community was more religious and really prided themselves on following rabbis, on being a center of rabbinic learning. And the reason for this is something called the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex was housed in the community for 800 years, and it was used by Maimonides, so in his writings. So it was they believed it to be a talisman, a good luck charm. And eventually, after the pogroms in 1947, it's smuggled out of Syria and it gets to the Ben Zvi Institute in Israel, where it's now on display in the same building as the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there's a wide belief, a self pride in being from Aleppo, because they believe that they're special. You know, I guess everybody thinks they're special, but the Aleppo Jews, it's like there's no comparison. Our rabbis were the best, and our, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, Matty Friedman wrote a book called the Aleppo Codex, which tells the
Fascinating.
story. Yeah,
Fascinating. If you haven't read his book, fascinating.
yeah. And the missing pages. There are missing
Yes.
pages which are kept as talismans, as you say, by certain Syrian Jews. Yeah, is that
Well, they'll show up one day.
And that sort of links into Anne and Michael Crook's story. Have you been able to secure vital records from the Syrian communities, or are they still held in Syria? Yeah, I know the Aleppo Codex is in Israel now, and a few other very precious.
Oh, no, we've gotten a lot out.
You got a lot out, yeah.
So if those of you who are not aware, Sephardic Heritage Project translated 7,550 Brit Milah records from 1868 to 1945 that are on both Sephardic Gen and Jewish Gen. They might also be on IGRA. I can't remember. And those records are searchable. Okay, they are Brit Milah records, over 7,500. They are searchable. We also found marriage records in the National Archives, community records that had been turned over to Israel, in the National Archives of Israel, that we translated, and there are about 1,300 or so marriage records. We found records of deaths, not that many, but those are also on those websites. We have other records we have not been able to translate. There are also records from Damascus that are online in Hebrew, and one of our projects is to database those and make them searchable in English. But those are online. And if you go to SephardicHeritageProject.org, there is a page of resources, and there are literally hundreds of links to different websites and different databases that you can search. But we were able to get a lot out. As for things like prayer books and Torahs and stuff like that, there is a museum called the Sephardic Heritage Museum. It's located in Lakewood. It is not open to the public, but they have privately collected lots and lots of artifacts and books and Torahs and religious items that they are housing in Lakewood. Their goal is to have a public museum. They have not set it up yet, but they've been collecting for at least a decade. So something to know. Yes, they've got, now, is there stuff still there? Yes, there's stuff still there. I know of, I've been told that that they left boxes and boxes that they could not get out, that were in the basement of the Damascus built synagogue building. With the Civil War, nobody knows what happened to that. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's been absolutely fascinating, Sarina. If anyone has a genealogical question, I will just recommend that you get in touch with Sarina. And there's Sephardic Gen and Jewish Gen who have websites. And thank you, Haya. You wrote the website of another organization there. The Lost. Oh no, that's a film, isn't it? The Lost Crown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully one day Harif will show the film, which tells the story of one of the precious Bibles from Aleppo.
Okay, someone has.
Oh, Judy Feldkar's on the call.
Oh my gosh! Hi, Judy. Where is she?
I need to introduce.
I've always wanted to meet you.
No, I could tell you that we've got someone. Holly has raised her hand, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I've asked Holly.
Okay.
If you could let me know what you want to ask Holly, and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not.
Do we see her face?
Not unmuted. Hang on.
Judith's unmuted, and I've asked her to start a video as well.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Hi,
I
Holly.
wanted to meet Sarina for a long time.
Oh, and I've been dying to meet
Judy,
you.
Judy, yes. Yeah,
And I want to, because what she said, what I heard, I missed a few minutes at the beginning of what she said was so amazing. It's exactly, but Sarina, there are the Damascus Keterim in the National Library in Israel, and
Yes.
they are beautiful. I got one out. Rabbi Hamra took the others. So they're there, but the rest of my stuff goes to the Sephardi Museum eventually anyway.
Which museum?
The Sephardi Heritage Museum in New Jersey.
Okay.
What? You know,
Judy, I know you're being honored on December 5th.
oh, it's nothing. I don't know what it is. All I know, it's my son's birthday in Israel, and he's furious that I won't watch him.
So I'm going to be writing a book on all these escapes post 1948. And as an academic and someone who has access to people in the community who are willing to be interviewed, I would love to have an interview with you as part of my book.
I would be honored. I
Okay.
think it's perfect.
so
I need someone to connect us so that I have her
yeah,
email.
I'll connect you if
Okay.
you're happy to be connected. I'm very happy to connect you both.
Thank you so much. And Judy, I'm so honored. And I would just love to talk to you. I have so much respect for everything you did.
Okay, should we
Thank
have-
you. And I looked at what you've just done about what became the Syrian community, and I stand in awe of not only how you put it all together, but look what that community did and how they came from each phase of history, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when I was running the escapes. I got to tell you, they are quite amazing.
I have a cousin, a distant cousin, who was the recipient of your work. And he described to me how he got out of Syria.
Can you
He
tell me his
described
name?
him going to the border with Lebanon at
Mhm.
midnight when the guards changed, and then being smuggled into Beirut, hiding in a basement for a month with just the clothes on their back, and then being told that they were leaving that night again at midnight, and they were taken by boat 4 miles out into international waters, into the Mediterranean. They
Exactly.
saw a signal. There was a helicopter overhead that signaled, and then a Israeli submarine surfaced, picked them up, and there were boats of 4 people in each boat, picked them up and took them to Israel.
Well,
And-
I met the head of the admiral who, and it's a story in itself. When you talk to me, I could tell you, nobody knew that it was coming where my involvement was.
Right.
And the admiral would stop the ferry boats out of the port of Juna in Lebanon and just stop the ferry boat, take off the Jews, and the ferry boat went on to Cyprus. And I would just know that they have them, and I was out of the picture.
Okay,
I can't wait to talk to you. You have no idea.
I think
so
I'll put you
excited.
both
I'm so
there because
excited.
obviously this is going to be another Zoom call, or actually another book,
Now
or
we've-
several books, and we can't wait to
Lynn
read
is
those
gonna make-
stories as well.
Shall let Holly in?
Yeah, okay. Holly's been waiting very patiently. Do you want to have a quick word, Holly, before we close?
Hi, Lynn.
Hello there, Holly.
Hey, how are you now? Now we can see each other.
Yeah.
Sarina, I would like to thank you for the wonderful talk. And I would like to tell you, I don't know if you could see this or not. My first introduction to Aleppo is this DVD called Tijuana Jews. And the lady who was interviewed said, oh, I'm from Aleppo. And now she's living in Tijuana. Of course, I'm sure everybody's dead by now. This is copyright 2005. And I don't know from nothing because I'm from a Russian background, Ashkenazi. So I don't know from nothing. So I just wanted to mention that to you. And I wanted to also ask you, Sarina, you know, there was in America, the hotel resorts did not allow Jewish people, you know, they were restricted.
Right. No,
With
Jews
the
are black.
Ashkenazi Jews, of course, we can, and I'm saying this to you in fondness, with the Ashkenazi Jews, our last names, we can't get away from this, okay? There's no way we're gonna get out of this, okay? Because our names are Jewish. Did the Sephardic Jews hopefully have a little easier time at the resorts because your last names are, again, I'm saying this in fondness, not quite so Jewishy?
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I mean, I remember anti-Semitism as a child.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember being spit on the streets of Brooklyn even.
Oh.
No. Yeah.
I got to visit
absolutely.
Brooklyn.
Do you think anybody escaped anti-Semitism? You know. No.
Yeah. Well, see, like I
No.
said, you know, I only know about the Ashkenazi Jews, but I thought maybe the Sephardic community would have not suffered as much because the names are not quite obvious. And I say that in fondness, of course.
Right. I know.
I also spent the summer of 2007 in Manhattan, New York, Queens, Long Island, and Brooklyn. And so I did get to see Williamsburg, Bensonhurst, Flatbush. But I thank you very much for the talk. And it helps me to understand also that a lot of Jews from Aleppo did come from, and again, I'm going to do this.
Oh,
there you go. The Jews from Tijuana.
Okay, thank you for that plug.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Don. Thanks a lot, Lynn. Be well.
By thanking Sarina for a most stimulating talk. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. I just wanted to remind everybody that we're now in November, which is Mizrahi Heritage Month for Jemena and for other organizations. And it culminates in the 30th of November, which of course is the day to mark the departure and expulsion